Welcome ICS3C folks. We're on our second lesson in CSS. You should have this note saved in your notes folder. You don't necessarily have to take the note this time. I've given it to you and I'm going to go through it real quick. Feel free to pause and play with the code. I think I've posted the code to Edmodo. So if you want to play with the code that you see and try some stuff out, go right ahead and pause me and do that. That would be a good thing to do. By all means, you can add things to the note if you like. Again, you can pause and do that if you want, but my plan is to try and go through this fairly quickly. The last two CSS lessons have there's a lot of material in there, and that's why I've given you the note rather than ask you to type. The first thing that I want to talk about is this idea of the HTML tree, and not all web pages look like this, but the idea of we've talked about nested tags and so on, and HTML is the overall one, and it splits into the head and the body, and there's certain things that show up in the head and there's certain things that show up in the body, not always divs. But why this is important is in this section on CSS, they talk about parents and children of tags. So div is a parent of H2 and H3. So and P and UL and OL and all those things have div as its parent because that's up one level in the tree. These things are nested inside this div. Similarly, this div is also a child, the child of, well, let's go up the tree to body. That would be the next thing that's, working from inside to outside. We say that this div is sibling of the other div, need an R in there, since they're at the same tree level, right? So these are all siblings, and these are siblings, okay? Head and body are siblings. Where this comes in is we can talk about parents and children of certain tags. Remember, HTML, CSS picks the most specific style to override. That is, it will pick a child style over a parent style if any is given. So let me tell you what that means. So you may, for instance, say in the body, everything in the body has a certain style. And so everything not specified underneath it, all of its children, all a body's children would have that style. But let's say you had a styling for the paragraphs. Well, that would override the styling for the body. It gets more specific to less specific. So keep that in mind when you're doing your style commands. And there were certain ways that we managed to style certain things, and that's what today's lesson is about. Nested selectors. So just like we had nested tags, right? HTML, body is inside HTML, div is inside body, which is inside HTML, P is inside div, which is inside body, which is in HTML. And that's, we indent so it's easier to read all that business. Nested selectors in the CSS. First of all, this was a neat thing. The universal selector, this applies to all HTML elements. If we wanted a style to apply to the entire thing, head, body, everything, it's kind of like we want to set the default, we put a star. Not separate from this child parent business, but this would be kind of like the default style. We style tree levels differently by nesting selectors. So for instance, and again, I think I've attached this code, and hopefully you can see that okay. Let me get rid of this. So here where it says div p, div p, well, this is going from outside to inside. So it's saying, all right, we don't want this div. We don't want the next div p. So this code, this style here applies to this stuff here. So the color blue, font family impact, dash blue border, and a background pink applies only to div p, which is ended up being on the web page. This is the web page down here, just that one line there. This code applies to the P nested inside the second div and not the other one, right? It didn't apply to this one because this div here was nested inside the body and that's it. So this would have been div P, not div P. Hopefully you see the difference there. Another thing we can do to style specific children is this idea of this greater than sign in your CSS document means to the immediate child. So body, the immediate div child. So the immediate div child would be this entire thing here would be all yellow, right? And that's the background color yellow. So that's this whole thing. And similarly, this one was yellow because of this code right here. So okay, hang on, Restall, you're lying to me here because this whole thing isn't yellow. This thing's pink, right? Yes, that's true, but this whole thing would be yellow. And if I didn't apply this specific, more specific styling to something inside, right? This was more specific, more inside. It overrode this yellow business, okay? And that's what it means. This is the idea of cascading, is we look for the most specific styling, and if we can't find anything, it cascades out to the default. Cascading. That's what the CSS cascading style sheets. What else have we got? By the way, if there's anything that you're bumping up against, don't be afraid to pause the video and ask me, right? I'm right there. Classes. Classes are used when a common style is to be applied to a number of different HTML selectors. So say we want a whole bunch of different things to be background pink and dash blue border. Well, we might make a class. So in HTML, we'd have whatever the selector is. So, and this could be any selector, right? This is a P or an H1 or a table data or whatever. We write class equals, and then this is a variable. This here is a variable that we made up, your class name. Then in the CSS file, it's dot your class name. That's how we would refer to this class. So classes are with dot whatever. And then we can style it however we like. And anytime we want to apply this style, we would just label it with this class. And I have some sample code underneath here in a second. But before we get to that, there is another way that we can do this, and it's with IDs. It's used when a selector requires a unique style. So say we got a one-off tag that we want to style a certain way, or maybe one or two. Then we'd use an ID, and the ID works very similarly to a class, but it's not. It's ID equals, and I'll get to the HTML syntax, but the CSS syntax is a hashtag. And if this seems familiar, we used the IDs to jump from one spot to another in our web page. We used this idea of a link with a hashtag, your ID name. And so what that looks like in HTML is it's ID equals and then whatever ID name you have. And then in the CSS, whatever styling you'd like that selector to look at. And so classes and IDs behave similarly, but they're used differently. IDs are usually for one or two tags only that want a specific style, and classes are for a whole bunch of things that you want to look and have the same feel. Here's some sample code. And again, I think I've given you this. I think I've given you this. So in this one, notice that I've labeled a bunch of different random stuff called class try. So a list item here, a table data there, a table row there, I've called class equals class try. And then in my CSS, I have dot class try, and I made it Comic Sans and the color violet for class try. And notice there, and there's basically random stuff looked like it had that styling, and it does. The first list item had that styling, the class try styling, and this one table data had that class styling, and then this entire row had that class styling. Notice that I styled my table just so we could see that I actually had a table in there that stood out. The ID try, I only made one thing with an ID try, and remember, we used IDs if we wanted to, jump from the top of the page to the bottom of the page, or from one part of a page to the middle, or whatever. We use these IDs, but we can use them for styling as well. So I use that one maybe ID, this table data here, maybe, with that styling, and then it applied only to that one thing. Okay, that might be it. Let me just check here. And again, you got questions, you can ask. Oh, yes, that's business about pseudoclass selectors, which confuse the issue even more. This is another way that we can add, I think it's a coolness factor. Worried about this is getting too long. Now we're okay. I'm going to finish off. This will only take a minute or two, I think. These electors allow us to access and style HTML elements that we may not even see directly. For instance, what the syntax looks like, the HTML selector, so this is like a P or an A or a body or whatever, and then this is whatever thing a pseudoclass selector might be. And we haven't seen any of these, by the way, these pseudoclass selectors, but they came up in the Code Academy thing, and I wanted to mention a few of them. There's a few of them that are really cool, especially the idea of a link. The links, where remember, A was how we included a link. A was a link, and then the pseudo selectors that they mentioned were link, visited, and hover, and we can style the way that they look if they've been clicked on or not, using these pseudoclass selectors. So link is that it hasn't been clicked on yet, and so notice that this is my web page that I made. It says here, there, and everywhere. Here has not been clicked on yet. That one has been clicked on yet, and that's what it looks like. And actually, when I copied this web page, I was hovering over this, and it made it red, and the text color yellow. Certainly, does this add any practicality to your web pages? No, but it's pretty darn cool. I want to mention another spot where Code Academy talks about pseudoclass selectors and this idea of first child and nth child. And this is the idea of, if you've got a whole list of the same type of things, they use paragraphs that you can select and style individual ones. But I think it's just as easy to use an ID or a class to do that rather than these pseudoclass selectors. And that brings up another point about HTML and CSS and coding in general, that there are lots of ways to accomplish the same thing. Don't get frustrated if one person, your neighbor, does it one way and they're sort of copying some sort of attitude that they're better than you because they're doing it a certain way. Your way, if it's functional and it makes sense to you and it's easy for other people to understand, that's good code. Okay, and don't worry about whether you have the same solution or a different solution as someone else. Usually, the best solution is the simplest solution because it's easier to maintain. All right, lecture over about coding. Now, I think you've got some exercises. We want to try and keep the exercises fairly short and sweet. Lot of stuff in this lesson, and a lot of pretty cool things, I think, in this one. So hopefully the assignments will allow you to explore some of those, and hopefully you understood that this stuff. It is getting more and more complicated, isn't it? Don't be afraid to ask if there's something that you don't understand.